Hey, it's Father Roderick, and here is my spoiler-free review of the first chapter of the Book of Boba Fett. Finally, new Star Wars. The last episode of The Mandalorian was a year ago, and what a year it has been, but finally Star Wars is back in the final week of 2021, a year that for many of us was so hard, so much of a test, and then to end it with a new Star Wars series, at least the first episode. I'm really grateful. Now, of course, was it good? We all saw the trailer, and I don't know about you, but for some reason the trailer didn't really grab me as much as trailers for previous movies or TV series in the world of Star Wars, and I was a little bit worried that this would be kind of a rehash of The Mandalorian, maybe a best-of Tatooine type of series where they would just do a lot of fan service. But what about the story? Are they able to tell a compelling story that also brings something new to the table? Because of course we've seen a lot of Boba Fett's backstory, well, already in the prequels, but also in the expanded universe, in the comics. So are they going to integrate some of that in this series? Are they going to completely reboot it? What kind of genre is this series going to be? How is it going to be different from what we saw in The Mandalorian? That also takes place in, mostly in a sand infested environment. I hate sand. Well, at least some of us do. And so I was just really excited and also a little bit worried when this first episode dropped. Well, let me reassure you right away, this was better than I expected, much better. And I think they set up the series in a fantastic way. What did I like? Again, this is going to be spoiler-free, so don't worry. First of all, I think that they did a brilliant job connecting this series and this first episode with the events of Return of the Jedi. I won't spoil again what will be shown, but believe me, you want to see this. You have been wanting to see this for decades, at least I have. And so to finally get a canon version of what happened after Boba Fett fell into the Sarlacc pit, which was a very non-heroic ending for a character that already at the time, but certainly later on, became so important to the fans. This series redeems it, and I'm super glad that they did it in a brilliant way. Visually, it wasn't too long. It was just the way it should be. So. The other thing that is amazing about this episode is how much it feels like Tatooine. This is literally going back to that world that we know so well, not just from watching the movies, both the prequels and A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, but also the Tatooine that we know from the video games. I don't know if you're a gamer, but if you played, Battlefront, you know what Tatooine should look like. If you've played even, the Old Republic, you've been on Tatooine for so long. So this series, I think, does a fantastic job connecting with all this imagery that we have of Tatooine and of all these familiar places, and also the familiar peoples that live on that planet. That's the second thing that I really appreciated. We've seen already the backstory of all these different cultures and creatures and groups of people that live on Tatooine in The Mandalorian, but now we get to see even more of those cultures, and they did it with respect to what we already saw in A New Hope. It's not that all of a sudden, if we only knew that Sand people or Jawas were like this, and it's so incongruent with what we've seen before. No, absolutely not. But this gives it a deeper layer. And I think if you go back to A New Hope, and maybe also to certain scenes in The Mandalorian, after having seen this series on Boba Fett, you'll get even a deeper appreciation for life on Tatooine. And Well, Anakin hates Tatooine for a reason, because it's not just sand, it's just such a harsh world where everything is out there to kill you. And even just surviving is so hard because water is such a scarce resource. And so the quest for water is one of the themes that we get to see in this episode as well. And it gives us, again, some more insight in how this water is found and where it is found. And it definitely surprised me. The acting, that of course is super important in a series like this. The acting is really, really good. I actually would say the acting is more modern than what we saw in the movies. George Lucas is a great writer, and it has, of course, an incredible imagination. One thing that is not part of his strengths is directing actors. And so a lot of what we saw previously on Tatooine was a bit stilted, a bit stiff, because George Lucas just doesn't give actors much to work with, especially later on in the prequels when he was constantly telling them, oh, this green screen, I'm just going to mess around with that in post-production. You know, we'll fix it in post. So that, I think, does not always get the best out of, the most out of the actors that he hired. But in this series, it's much more modern. The dialogue is much more modern. And that was already the case in The Mandalorian, of course. One of the strengths of The Mandalorian is the dialogue. It's just the script writing is so good. And in this series, it's even more, in a certain way, it's more casual. It feels even more real. And you'll see it when you watch this episode. There are some scenes in there that I think are way above the acting that we see in The Return of the Jedi. There is excitement in this episode. There are some surprises, some visual surprises. And you would think, you know, Tatooine, we've seen Tatooine. We know what Tatooine looks like. We know what lurks in the darkness. Well, you haven't seen everything. There are some really great surprises and some homages to old-fashioned cinema. Again, this I can't expand upon it because it's a spoiler, but there is one scene that is a true homage to the kind of Saturday matinee movies that George Lucas loved to watch when he was a kid. You know, what Star Wars is based on. And of course, in those times, monsters and enemies were often stop motion and it looked a little bit clunky. But they take the visual language of those movies and then they give it a CGI upgrade that is unbelievable. And there were times when watching this episode where I was wondering, is this CGI or is this practical? There were some creatures in there, some droids, some androids, where I felt like this has to be practical. And there are some scenes where you know intellectually that this must be CGI, but it looks so flawless. And the interaction with the actors, which is always kind of the problem with mixing CGI and acting, often you feel like it's a little bit out of sync, it doesn't convince totally, but it does in this series. There is not one single moment where I was thinking, oh, that looks a bit, you know, CGI. There are some scenes filmed in the middle of the episode where it did give me a bit of a vibe like it was filmed inside a studio, but that was just a very minor thing. I don't know if they went on location for a lot of this or whether they filmed this in this, you know, dome that they built for The Mandalorian. I guess it's just a mix of all sorts of different techniques. But most of the scenes really feel like they've been filmed outside. It's gritty. It is as if they went to Tunisia. I don't know if they did. Probably they didn't because of COVID. But there are a lot of scenes outside that feel just as real as what we saw in Return of the Jedi and in New Hope, and to a certain extent in the prequels, although I often thought that the Tatooine in the prequels looked too CGI, too much CGI, not real enough. Anyway, there is another visual scene in this episode, in this first episode, that will make you cry out in joy and thanksgiving because it is another reference to a famous scene in A New Hope, but it is executed in such an amazing way and everything looks so good. Oh, I wish I could talk spoilers. I'll do another video after you've seen the episode where I will be able to expand upon some of the stuff that I loved. And of course, you can also watch my watch party if you want to see like on the spot reactions to what I see. And I chat a lot. I warn you in advance. It's not just me looking at a screen. But there are a few moments in this first episode that are really epic and visually in execution are on par with Return of the Jedi, and that is a feat. I think that is a great accomplishment of the makers, because this is, after all, this is TV, but in many ways the Tatooine that we get to see in this TV show is even better than we got to see in the movies. So it's just so promising for the future. Now, the music, we need to talk about the music. Of course, you and I, we want John Williams, right? But John Williams has said that the last Star Wars movie was also going to be his last work as a composer, as a movie composer. And instead, they used the same composer that they used very successfully for The Mandalorian. And the music has a lot of that same vibe. It's even a bit more like a soundtrack for a Western movie. This whole episode feels very much like old-fashioned cowboy movies, and also mafia movies. There's a bit of that crime lord dynamic also in this first episode. But because the music is so different from the classic John Williams approach, it works. You forget, it's not like oh, this sounds a bit like John Williams, but it's not as good. It is so different that you don't miss John Williams. Although, I have to say, there are some musical references to John Williams. It's very subtle, but there are a few moments where I was like, oh, that sounds like A New Hope. So that's cool. What else? Overall editing is really good. Choreography, there's a lot of fighting and running and action. And I thought the choreography was great. Editing was also really great, even better than the editing that we saw in the trailer, where you see a glimpse of the fight that we see in this first episode, but it still felt a little bit stilted. It didn't convince me that much, and in this version, it's like, wow, yes, this works. This is what we want to see. I would say on par with the type of action that we see in The Mandalorian. The overall immersion quality of this episode is also impressive. We all want to live in the Star Wars universe. At least I would like to. Maybe not on Tatooine, but I want these series and movies to just, pull me into the screen and let me be in the Star Wars galaxy, even if it's just for a bit more than half an hour. And that is absolutely a success with this new series. I felt like I was on Tatooine, and the story is well paced. It keeps you constantly engaged. There's not one moment where you're like, oh, this could have been cut out, this could have been faster, or they're spinning it out. Again, that's always a risk with TV shows, is that they take their time, but sometimes it's a little bit too slow and boring. Certainly the first episode, the premiere of a new series, it's got to be well paced, and I think they did a great job. And I felt for half an hour like the world around me didn't exist anymore. I was just inside Star Wars, and inside classic Star Wars. This was not a new planet that we get to know. No, it all feels like familiar territory, and at the same time it looks more glorious than ever before. What a series. I'd love to hear your feedback. Let me know in the comments. Maybe you've seen this after you watched the first episode, then yeah, you know why I couldn't talk about certain things explicitly. But if you are still going to watch the episode, oh my gosh, If you're a Star Wars fan, you're in for a treat. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see more of my watch parties and commentary on Star Wars and on other geek-related stuff. And if you want to listen to my podcasts, I record 2 podcasts every week, then go to fatherroderick.com or just look for Father Roderick in your podcasting software. And if you want to support my work, I have a Patreon community. You can go to patreon.com/fatherroderick. And if you become a patron, you get access to my Discord server, which is where a lot of Star Wars fans gather, and we talk about these episodes, and it's a lot of fun to have that community. Plus, of course, you enable me to do more of these videos. So, whatever you do, may the Force be with you, and thanks for watching. I'm Father Roderick, signing off.